aviation safety. What's next for the airlines?
Well, of course, we're taking a two-pronged approach. We are going to be looking at financial help to shore up the airlines because they have such a domino effect on our economy. These layoffs, of course, are going to resonate throughout the tourism industry. But secondly, we are going to immediately start putting together a beefed-up security package for our airports and our aircraft, and we're starting today in the Senate, and I hope we have something to the President next week.
You've heard all the questions already. How could this have happened? Why wasn't the door that leads to the cockpit more secure? Why weren't more measures taken at airports like Boston's Logan and Washington's Dulles? How do you answer those questions?
Well, no one anticipated the kind of attack that we have seen. There's no doubt nobody anticipated it. We have not had the same kind of security as European countries have because we just have thought that going into the cockpit was not our major security risk. We now are changing that view. I think you will see measures to secure the pilots in the cockpit. You will see the redesigning of aircraft very shortly, but there will be temporary measures probably put in place before that.
Reagan National, which is, I assume, an airport that you have used often, Washington Times reporting that it will open probably sometime next month. What's your reaction?
Well, I think we should reopen Reagan National when it is absolutely secure to do so. And I think the measures that we are going to be taking first on an emergency basis and then on a more long-term basis that would upgrade the screening of anyone who gets on an aircraft, upgrade the screening of the baggage, and put someone on the aircraft that is an armed peace officer. Now we're beginning to shut the loopholes, and I think that will happen. And if it is found that we can reopen Reagan, of course everyone wants to. It is a wonderful, convenient airport, but I wouldn't for 1 minute suggest that we open it until the risk is gone.
And in the end, how much money do you think we're talking about to help the airlines? Can you put a price tag on it?
Well, Steve, we are wrestling with it right now, trying to determine a quantifiable loss. We don't want to write a blank check, but we do want to shore up this important industry in our economy. And so we're now looking at perhaps $3 to $5 billion in immediate help. We're looking at taking the burden of airport security off the airlines. That would take away big costs from them. We're looking at, down the road, stabilizing them. What we want to do first is attract the flying public back by showing that there is absolute security, and then that will rebuild the airlines naturally. But until that happens, we need a bridge.
What about other companies, other industries, like the insurance industry that have been hit hard? Would Congress come in and help them as well?
I think we're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis. My view is that we should take one step at a time. We know the airlines are in a crisis. We know that that's an important part of our commerce and our economy, so we're going to hit that first. What we need to do coming down from that, we will look at, we will try to do something responsible when we see a major industry teetering. Now, let me say that as we are preparing for the national defense of our country, we must have a strong economy to support that effort. We know this war is going to be lengthy and expensive, so the last thing we want is for a major industry or a major part of our economy to crater and then cause a rippling effect. So that's why it is important for us to have this financial aid package as we are also planning our national defense strategy.
We're talking with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. Our phone lines are open. The number's on the bottom of your screen. 202 is the area code, 737-0001. 202-737-0002, depending on where you live, and for our international viewers, 202-628-0205. We can't stress this enough. 202 is the area code, so you don't dial a local number, and if it's early in the morning where you're at, wake somebody up and get them angry. So we don't want to do that. Should security be a federal mandate when it comes to airports, as opposed to something that state or local jurisdictions do?
Yes, I think the federal government now must take over airport security. When you're dealing with terrorists, the FBI and the CIA are a vital part of the intelligence gathering to determine where the risks are. I think this must be a federal responsibility, which will be new.
Peekskill, New York, with Senator Hutchison. You're on C-SPAN. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
I would just like to comment on the philosophy of small government versus big government. What we've seen here is small government in action, the abdication of government responsibility in airport security. And the second big one that deserves comment is the emergency public health system, which I understand has been allowed to slip into bad disrepair, and which we may need not just with German chemical warfare, but with these other epidemics from the tropics that we see popping up around here and there. I think that this philosophy of small government should be re-examined. Can you comment, please?
Yes, I think we have to prioritize what we do in government, and the things that only the government can do, we must do them well. I think airport security should now become a federal issue. Certainly public health. I think your point is very well taken, that we are seeing new types of disease strains coming into our country, and we must have a strong system of public health, which I think we do, and I think we need to make sure that we do. But I don't think that means that we have to be irresponsible. I think we need to make choices, and that's exactly what we will be doing.
Should there, for lack of a better name, be a Department of National Security that would involve airport security, FEMA, and other agencies involved in domestic issues?
You know, I think that's a good question, Steve, and something we are considering. As we are looking at airport security, we have talked about, is the FAA really the right agency, or do we need DEA in there, or do we need other types of law enforcement officials with expertise? But right now, I think we're going to go forward with an aviation security system that is unique to aviation, but perhaps with more coordination. Now, we've had 1 week to really address this in these circumstances, so I can't say that we wouldn't be changing that view as we have had input. But FEMA clearly is a part of the reaction. It's a part of the healing and the cleanup. But I think that really looking at issues such as Border Patrol and Customs and expertise in screening is something that we ought to look at. But then you have airport security in an aircraft, which is a very different type of training and experience. So we're going to be looking at all of the options, but I think we're going to move forward on aviation security now as we beef up DEA and some of these other agencies, FBI clearly, CIA. We're going to make changes in our intelligence gathering capabilities, but we'll be doing it all quickly, and I think quickly to say, in addition, we will have a serious overall view of terrorism now that could have more responsibilities down the road that would be even more coordinated.
Washington Post reporting this morning that American Airlines and United Airlines both announcing layoffs, 20,000 per airline. The Boeing company with 30,000 expected to be laid off, and the headline saying that the layoffs right now nearing 86,000 and could reach 100,000 within the next couple of weeks. Next call is from Houston, Texas for Senator Hutchison. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Hutchinson.
Good morning.
I don't think I have to give you a history of the hijacking in the U.S., but I do want to point out that in the 60s it was pretty bad, so bad that in the 70s Congress applied some restrictions to the airlines and gave them responsibility for security, which I have totally messed up. They lowballed it on equipment, personnel, and procedures, all for the sake of the bottom line, where they are now victims of their own greed, ma'am. Just a few dollars, just a few dollars would have taken care of this problem and solved it. The airline manufacturers have refused to put a proper barrier between the cockpit and the passenger's compartment, so they are also culpable in this situation.
Response?
Well, I think that what you're saying is in part correct, but I think that you also are assuming that they knew the risk, or that some of the reason that the cockpit has not been secure is because pilots had other responsibilities, and it wasn't considered actually in the best interest of the pilots to have the security, because it was felt that perhaps if they got sick or had a heart attack, that someone would need to get in to be helpful. So I think we can have great hindsight, but I think now we have to move forward, and we have to say, okay, the federal government is going to take over security. We are going to close loopholes. We are going to learn from this horrendous experience, and we're going to tamp down airport security. But let me say, we are not going to be the general that just fights the last war. I think aviation security will absolutely be the best in the world in the next month in this country. But we've got to look at terrorism as a big picture threat to this country. And that means chemical warfare, biological warfare. It means protecting through our state and local governments, our public works systems, our subways, our mass transit systems. This is a much bigger project, and we are going to address it in that way.
This morning, British Airways announcing that it will be laying off 7,000 of its employees, a 10% cutback in its flights. How do we make sure that the flights coming into this country are as secure as we want the flights domestically to be?
Well, certainly we are going to be looking at the Air Marshal program for U.S. carriers that are coming into or out of our country. Looking at what the foreign carriers would do, I don't know yet if there are going to be different requirements for them that would match ours. We really haven't discussed that, but I think it's a good point to make, and at least set some requirements for carriers that would come in to our airports to make sure that they meet the requirements for coming in and bringing passengers in.
And what about private jets, private planes, independent charters as opposed to commercial carriers? How do you secure those planes from being moved into the hands of potential terrorists?
Well, of course, that's a very different issue, and the risks are a little bit different, and they would have to be addressed in that way. I think we're going to have to look at the general aviation, what would be the requirement to come into an American airport, period, foreign carrier or general aviation.
Next call from Chicago. Good morning. You're on C-SPAN.
Good morning. Senator, you mentioned that we're going to be looking at all forms of transportation, providing security and safety for all forms of transportation. You indicated similarly on the floor of the Senate and in your magnificent presentation last week that we will do everything necessary to ensure the safety of the traveling public. I'm the founder of a civic organization called We Need Seatbelts that's dedicated to getting 3-point seatbelts on school buses in particular, but all forms of transportation such as intercity buses like Greyhound, railroad trains like Amtrak, because the partial compartmentalization leaves passengers loose in the box. Every time there's a rollover bus or a side impact on a bus, everybody in the bus gets injured because they're not safe. Now that we're finally looking at making sure that all forms of transportation provide necessary security and safety for the passengers, can we please do something about upgrading our standards and requiring at the federal government level that seatbelts, 3-point seatbelts, be included on buses and trains? Because when I go to local government, they say, well, the federal government doesn't require it, so we can't force this on people.
Thanks, caller.
I agree with you 100%. When I was vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, I said that we should have seatbelts on school buses, for heaven's sakes. I mean, it was just a no-brainer. I agree with you on Amtrak trains. Any passenger carrying vehicle, we can minimize the injuries and deaths with seatbelts.
Show you this story this morning we talked about in our first hour, Senator, from the LA Times, that Congress is looking at about $180 billion in both emergency spending and potential tax cuts.
We are certainly looking at spending increases that are beyond anything that we have talked about before. The tax cuts are also on the table. If, you know, I want to be careful to make sure that anything we do is to spur the economy. And I think the payroll tax cuts in this atmosphere would be excellent, because that is something, again, that people could feel immediately. And so I think we are going to do everything to prop up our economy. If our economy falters, then our national defense efforts will also suffer, and we're not going to let that happen.
Our guest is Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who is the ranking member of the Commerce Subcommittee on Aviation. Who else is on that committee?
Well, Senator Jay Rockefeller is chairman. I'm the ranking Republican. We also have Senator Ted Stevens, Senator Trent Lott, Senator Conrad Burns, Senator Danny Inouye. On the Democratic side, it's a real strong committee. Aviation Subcommittee has always been one of the leading committees in Congress. And as a matter of fact, I have to say we passed an airport security bill last year, and some of the elements of that bill had not yet been implemented, but one of the most important was the requirement for more training for screeners. And the rules are just coming out now that would implement the law that we passed through this committee.
An email from a viewer in Omaha who points out that she's admired you for a long time, says, why is Washington, D.C. more important than other major cities? Closing Reagan, but not San Francisco or JFK, makes me think the people in D.C. think they are more important than other citizens.
Oh, that is not the case at all. The reason that Reagan has not been reopened is because of the proximity to the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol. And we saw from what happened September 11th that we did not have the ability to respond quickly enough to airplanes coming in that close. Now, when we are able to, and I think the reason it hasn't been reopened is because of the air defense not yet being ready, and plus other threats that we know are still out there. But no airport would be reopened if it weren't thought to be safe. And the New York airports stayed closed longer because of the continuing threats. So no person is more important than another person, but it's the security threats that differ.
Another call, Warsaw, Missouri. You're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I watched the hearings yesterday on the committee on the C-SPAN. Thank you for C-SPAN, and good morning, Ms. Hutchison. And I think the airlines has an attitude. They're blaming the Congress for shutting them down, because they should have had the security in place a long time ago. Follow the rules that was suggested to them. I say, okay, give them the $5 billion, but with a stipulation they pay it back in, say, 10 years.
I think a lot of this will be loan guarantees, so that if we are called on to meet loans, that they would eventually be repaid. It won't all be loan guarantees, but we're going to try to do this in a responsible way. Our goal is to shore up the airlines, to stop the layoffs, and to keep other people working, to have the impact on our economy be minimized.
When it comes to this specific issue, what do you think the President will talk about tonight when he addresses Congress?
I think he will talk about the airline support package. He will support it. The details are still in the works. I know that the White House and Congress are negotiating and talking to the airlines, trying to determine what is the most definable loss that we can put forward. No one is going to want to write a blank check, but also no one is going to let a major industry with the fallout that could occur go under, and especially an industry where acts that were beyond its control have caused such huge losses. The grounding of the airlines all over America last week certainly were not of their doing, and I think a compensation for that is warranted.
Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who is a Republican from Texas, second term,
Yes.
ranking member of the Subcommittee on Aviation, and a new title over the last couple of months, Mom.
Yes, that's the best title of all.
Your new daughter?
Yes, her name is Bailey, and she is wonderful, and it's just the most wonderful experience I've ever had in my life.
How do you juggle that in your job?
It's like every working mom, it's not easy, but you make the time. You just do it, and the rewards are so great that the 3 o'clock feedings don't really, you know, they don't compare in their inconvenience to the great joy of being able to hold that little baby.
Senator Hutchison, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. Lee Hamilton, former member of the House, will be joining us to talk about international security issues on C-SPAN's Washington Journal.